Hello, welcome to the Lion Ghost Show. I'm your host, Frog E. As this is our pilot episode, I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to what we're about. As you may have seen in the intro, this show attempts to take a look at philosophy, especially in regards to faith and skepticism, in the format of discussions. Although all the members of the show are atheists, we will be attempting to approach future topics from an open-minded perspective. With this in mind, of course, we all have our personal biases, but that's what gives us our unique personalities. We will look to explore other ideas outside those biases and hopefully learn something along the way. Earlier on, Corvette, also known as Redline V8, made a teaser trailer promoting the show. Here it is.
What is religion? Some say religion is a mental roadblock. Others say it's the road to enlightenment. Some say religion is a way of shutting out the inconvenient truth. Others say religion is the way to ultimate truth. Some say it deters people to treat others with respect. Others say religion is the basis for all morality. Some say religion gives us false truths. Others say atheism leads to false truths. I understand that there are many different opinions out there, but I only see this as an opportunity to discuss such topics. These topics need to be discussed so that maybe, just maybe, we can come to truth. Join us. The Lion Ghost Show, every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on BlogTV. Thank you.
Corvette, thank you for that video. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about yourself, such as how you came to the views you have today and how you see purpose in the show.
I see my own part of the show as just another one who is interested in this topic, who's interested in discussing the ideas, because I see this as a very important thing that we have to do. We have a duty to explore, the unknowns of our lives. I came to atheism by exploring. I came to atheism by knowing that, hey, there might be some things out there that I do not know about. Maybe I should research this a little bit further. As soon as I began doing my research, I came to realize that there were inconsistencies in what I was believing. And coming to terms with that, I said, okay, fine. Maybe I don't know all that I should know. So in exploring that, I come to as an atheist and an ex-Catholic. And quite honestly, I'm happier knowing what I know now instead of being flat out lied to in my own opinion.
Okay, thank you for that, Corvette. But of course, the show isn't just run by you and me. I'd like everyone else to answer the same questions. So, Pragmatic, how did you come to the view you have today, and how did you see purpose in the show?
By view, I guess you're meaning my outlook on religion. And by that, I was born and raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, and generally accepted most of the beliefs within the Catholic Church until around college when I started, where I started to realize I had no reason to believe in God. So I figured, well, until I find a reason, just go with more the agnostic kind of viewpoint. I tend to lean more towards atheism because of the fact that I don't see any actual evidence to support the idea. And I'm sure many atheists, can share this sort of viewpoint. But yeah, overall, I tend to just look at things, as my name suggests, in a more pragmatic kind of view. If it's practical, I'm okay with it. So I have nothing negative against religion, but I myself am not religious.
Okay, thank you, Prag. Same goes for you, Strife.
Well, I honestly never was a theist like any of, the than Corvette, than Redline and Pratt. I myself see life in a more scientific aspect, so the need to believe for me lacked. So I mostly come for the discussion. That's all I gotta say.
Okay, and how do you see the show itself? Why are you here, and what do you see yourself achieving with the show, or what do you see the show achieving itself?
Discussion. An interesting discussion between theists, well, whatever, theists, atheists, whatever else there is, I guess.
Okay, cool. Wits, how did you come to atheism? Because I understand you used to be religious yourself.
That is correct. And yeah, just for any viewers, it's Wittgensteinian, but you call me Wit. And so that's probably what people will be calling me. And there's a lot of, yes, I was very religious. I was on the opposing side of this conversation for most of my life until about 6 or 7 years ago, after entering college, I guess, was the major turning point. There's a lot of factors that enter into my transition from what I started off as essentially a young Earth creationist to now full-on theist or atheist. But for brevity's sake, perhaps the most important factor was the line of reasoning that I went down, which was basically overcoming the fear to really ask myself honestly, or to really question my beliefs once and for all. Once I got over the fear, which I got over basically by reasoning that if God truly exists and he is truly a moral, loving being, he will not mind me making sure that what I believe is tenable. And slowly but surely, as my knowledge of the world grew, my beliefs changed accordingly. And as for my, that's the short version, I guess. But as for my goals for the show, I think perhaps this is a little idealistic, but I think here in America, this issue has become one of, if not the most divisive issue between atheists and theists. And we all know that atheists are among the most distrusted people in America. And part of my goal for the show is to hopefully bridge that divide, because America is becoming more and more polarized politically, and even more so on this issue than all others. And so hopefully by promoting respect towards each side, we can at least respect each other enough to just understand what the other person actually believes, what is their actual perspective, and get to what it is that they actually believe, instead of demonizing each other, in which case no progress will be made. And hopefully, if we can at least come to respect each other and both accept that we are all trying to, make the world a better place, although we differ in how we want to do that, then at least we can maybe talk without demonizing each other. So, it's best I can say it.
Okay, awesome. I have a bit more of a personal story to give, in the sense that I'm going to go into some details that normally I wouldn't be all that comfortable discussing, but I won't go into the gruesome details of it. But actually I'd say my story with religion starts with the death of my father when I was about 13 years old. My parents were, well, my mum is definitely an atheist. My dad, I would take to be a deist at best, maybe a pantheist, but I never really got to the age where I could discuss the topic with him in strong detail. So as far as I could gather, if he believed in a higher force, it was very very unreligious, in the sense that it didn't conform with any major doctrines or anything. But when he died when I was 13, it was a big blow to me, of course, because as you can imagine, at that stage of your life, your father plays a very important role. and my nan is very religious, and so she made attempts to indoctrinate me into the faith. I wouldn't necessarily say out of selfishness, but she lost her son, and as you can imagine, losing your son can either shake you out of religion or drive you further into it. And I think for her it did that, drive her further into it, because she wanted to believe that he still existed in some form. And she used to see a medium and talk to her and think she was talking to my dad. And she'd tell me stories about conversations she'd have with my dad. And naturally, I'd want to believe that because I wanted to believe that my dad was still there. And so I formed a kind of spirituality where I'd like to think he was watching over me, making sure that I'm doing well or whatever. I mean, what can a spirit do to make sure you're doing well in life? They can't do anything. But I still liked to believe that he could travel wherever he wanted and do whatever he liked, and it seemed like a nice idea to me. But when I was around 16, I started doing A-level philosophy, and in England, A-levels are what you take before you do your degree. And so when I studied philosophy, I had to question my own views on things, because that's the nature of philosophy, making the mundane seem alien. And when I started questioning my beliefs and applying skepticism to them, they seemed to fall apart. I think one of the biggest problems for me, especially in regards to Christianity, the religion of my nan, I couldn't ever accept the Bible as it is. I mean, I had a vague spirituality, but I couldn't ever believe in this concept of Jesus dying for your sins and all of that. So I guess a lot of Christians would say I wasn't a true Christian, so to speak. But I definitely had a spirituality, and as I studied philosophy, I'd create new ideas of how the world works and how it relates to Platonic forms and what have you, but they soon died away when I joined a website called Debate Unlimited, which was at the time run by a man called Martin Willett, who is another Englishman. When I went there, I didn't actually join in many debates at first. I just read up on what other people debated, and I'll try to cut it short and just state that they taught me a new one, and I learned a lot about debate there. And I really refined how I saw the world, but also how I go about learning and how I go about arguing. And I think it did a great deal for me. And then I guess I'll lead on to how I met you guys is through Shock of God's Room. There I have debated a fair few Christians of a fundamentalist nature which I hadn't really come across before. I mean, I have met creationists and stuff, but I didn't really get into what I'd call philosophical arguments with them. I was actually quite surprised at some of the level of intellect of some of them, and so I went off to do some research, and I guess that's how I've come to this show, to learn more. And so among my reasons for joining this show is firstly to learn from other people and figure out how they see the world and apply their ideas to my own and see what works and keep whatever works and discard what doesn't. But I would be lying if I denied that I want to influence other people at the same time, and share my own views. And so I'd like to promote discussion. So do any of you guys have any questions for each other? And I'll open the floor to discussion now.
Yeah, pretty much. As far as going into Shock of God's Room, and, well, that's how you met all of us, I wanted to see where we all thought of the people who are actually in Shock of God's Room, because I saw that Shock of God likes to debate with people, but at the same time he doesn't, because he kind of likes to ban a whole bunch of people, but at the same time, there are a few other peoples in there that I actually like. For example, some people might disagree with me, but Viva's one person I could consider a huge friend of mine. Another one is Ramirez. He's a really good friend of mine. As you know, I don't think the Shock of God is doing a bad job as far as finding people who are a lot smarter than he is. It's a great room to be in, and I fully recommend going there. But I wanted to hear what you guys all thought of that room as a whole.
A quick response. I think you bring up an interesting point that although Shock of God is considered a very confrontational character and somewhat ignorant of what atheists actually believe, or misleading and dishonest about it, it seems somewhat ironic that we wouldn't even be here talking if it weren't for his room. So in a sense, he's actually doing a very good job for the atheist community and a great disservice to his own, because I've noticed a lot of his moderators or people that actually frequent the room criticize him, and I don't necessarily mean they dislike him or they hate him or they've got bad things to say about him, but at the very least they don't necessarily agree with his tactics and how he approaches atheists.
Exactly. What the room has showed me is that even though there might be some people out there that disagree with us, we can still have a nice conversation on this topic. And that has really sparked my hope for this show. The fact that it can be done. We have shown it to work.
Mm-hmm. Other guys?
Considering the fact that he's attracted so much attention, I'd say the guy actually is on to something. Shock, I mean. If he's intentionally just trying to get publicity, it's working. I may not agree with his arguments. I tend to notice that he relies a lot more on the same technique every time. But I think overall what he's done is pretty much bring a bunch of people together and allowing people to express themselves with opposing views, and I actually have to commend him on that part, because essentially that's what his chat room does.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I first went to the room, of course, it was just because I'm very, very curious on this topic. I like talking about these things. It's a pastime for me. And this is where I met Strife first, and that was a hell of an experience. But Strife, definitely turned me on to the idea of discussing this further and saying, hey, why just go there when we can start our own show? And so even though Strife is, how do I say this without being totally rude? Strife is actually a nice guy. Strife's a really nice guy. He really turned me on to this. So if you want to thank anyone for coming up with the idea for the show, it's definitely all Strife's idea. So good on you, Strife. Good job. You didn't screw this one up completely, totally, maybe. I don't know.
I got a question in terms of shocks, but I don't know if you guys want to go there.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm in the minority here in actually trying to defend Shock, or rather defend his question, because I feel like a lot of atheists just dismiss the question out of hand as nonsensical, meaningless, etc., whereas I actually think he's asking something meaningful, but he's not doing it in a terribly effective way. I think his question is essentially, what is the evidence that God doesn't exist? And insofar as that is the question, which I really think it is answerable, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, we if that's what he's actually asking, then yeah, it is a question that deserves an honest answer. And my answer to that would be, we don't have any evidence that God doesn't exist, just like they don't have any evidence that God does exist. We lack a belief. We're not asserting it one way or the other. I always use the fork in the road example. If you're traveling down a road and you get to a fork in the road, you go down one road that says God 100% does exist, and then you go down the other road that said God 100% does not exist. I'm not going down either one. I'm stuck at that fork. That's what atheism is to me, or that's the position I'm in. That's how I define atheism, and that's why I call myself an atheist. And so that's the way I can answer his question. I just don't think anyone has been upfront about him or has just said that to him in that way before. Maybe he's just not getting it, but I'm not sure.
See, I feel like that's the only response that I ever hear. And I don't deny that that's a legitimate type of atheism. In other words, this is where I think the distinction between what is called negative or positive, or it's also called strong and weak atheism. And maybe I'm in the minority again here, but I guess I'm actually the positive, strong atheist, in that I actually do say I have a belief on the issue, and that I don't believe such a being exists. As, given that we've defined it in a clear-cut way, which is another issue. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I'd like to possibly get some guests on and talk to them about how they arrived at their atheism and or theism, and see what their thoughts are on the discussion in general.
Sure.
Do you have anyone lined up, Corvette?
Yeah. Strife wanted to invite, and I know I'm going to be pronouncing this wrong, Venoloid, I think it is. But I'll be more than happy to invite him on and see what he has to say on it. Okay, so if he wants to come on, let's bring this guy into the conversation.
All right, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine, man. How's it going?
Pretty good. I hope I got my technology set up.
Yeah, technology. It's okay. My computer crapped out on me. I had to spend $500 to even be here tonight, so you're not alone there.
Hi, what would you like us to call you for the sake of the show?
Let's see. For the sake of show, I guess you could call me Alex. That's my name.
Okay, Alex, welcome to the Lying Ghost Show. I don't know if you've been watching thus far, but I've been asking each member of the show to discuss how they came to the beliefs they have, and we've all gone through that. So I was just wondering, how did you come to your beliefs?
Well, kind of like you, it started with the death of my mom. I think it was 9 or something like that. And let's see, the engineer in me wouldn't quit on thinking about, because let me back up. When my mom died, I was thinking it was really nice, like, oh, she's in heaven, she's watching over me, all that stuff that your parents always tell you. And I should say that my church was the most wishy-washy, non-denominational Christian church ever, so it wasn't really an indoctrinative religious childhood. It was just sort of a background noise to my life. And so I was like, okay, my mom's dead, but it's nice that she's up in heaven looking down at me. And then the engineer in me kicked in and said, hey, wait a minute, does that make any sense? And the big revelation for me was the dichotomy between science and how we approach pretty much every aspect of our lives, and religion, where it's just sort of a faith thing that gets passed down, kind of like genetic diseases almost. And it was that dichotomy where I said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on with this religion thing? It seems so vastly different than every other aspect of our lives that we apply skepticism to. And from there, it was just kind of a a gentle migration away from religion. Just sort of as I grew up as a teenager, had my own independent thoughts, and it was a very natural feeling process. So that was that.
What was, in your opinion, the hardest part of that transition? For me, it was the sledgehammer effect. I call it that. It would be the sledgehammer effect of just, being scared that, oh no, God is going to know I don't believe him anymore. That kind of thing. That to me was the hardest hurdle to get over. Was it the same story for you?
Not really. Everyone is allowed to hate on me because I really lucked out in terms of when and where I became an atheist. No one around me really gave a shit. My dad is like the most wishy-washy Christian, like the flaming moderate, you might even say. My brother is an atheist, but he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't care. None of my friends really cared, and it just wasn't really a big deal for me, in all honesty. I kind of wish it were, because then I'd have something interesting in terms of my social history to talk about, but it didn't really hit home with anyone around me or with me. So no kind of sledgehammer effect, really. It was just sort of a, oh, well, that's that, as I grew up kind of thing.
How do you feel about religion in the world in terms of politics, in terms of spirituality, in terms of people you talk to day to day? How do you feel about what people do with religion?
Well, it's often said that I forget who said this, but I know it's someone I should know, for good people to do bad things, that takes religion. And
Christopher Hitchens.
Right, that's that. But I think that kind of generic stance on religion is a little short-sighted in the sense that it's not just religion, it's any sort of baseless ideology, and you can point to all the famous dictators of history, Stalin, Mao, and what they did was independent of their religion. It was the driving factor was some baseless ideology, whether or not it was religious. So that's kind of the thing about religion in the world. Religion, in my interpersonal conversations, I think really does act like blinders in my experience, where I'll talk to someone, they're like, oh yeah, I like to talk about religion and philosophy, and they'll be really religious. And, you know, it's almost shocking how little they've actually thought about it, how few logical fallacies they actually are familiar with. And I end up kind of having to teach them about it because they've never stepped outside that little sphere they have.
And do you have any positive views on religion? Anything that you think might be beneficial?
Well, of course, there is the community, which is very difficult for atheists to replicate because it's kind of like, you know, let's gather around this thing we don't believe in almost a sense. So there's the community factor, which is obviously a very big asset to religion. And I think that's a really big thing. The other thing is obviously the emotional teddy bear effect. I don't know if that's what it's called. But, and that is obviously a positive thing in many people's lives that doesn't usually have any negative manifestations. I mean, people can take a happy pill and feel good. That's fine for them. Obviously, the problem is when their belief bleeds into other people's lives, and you get that whole mess.
Yeah, it becomes such a big part of them that they start, you know, I'm assuming unintentionally evoking it into other people who really do not, you know, go in that direction. And so in a way I see religion as potentially hurting somebody, but not on the scale that everyone wishes to say it is. I mean, sure, there might be a few bad apples out there. You know, we can always go back to 9/11. You know, that was religiously inspired. But, you know, let's not forget that most of the people you see in America who call themselves Muslim actually don't agree with them. They say, no, they were just insane, which I would agree with them there as well.
I don't agree 9/11 was religiously inspired. At least that was not the primary motivation. You could say they used religion to try to justify what they did, perhaps, or to help them fulfill that, what have you. But I think the primary motivation was purely political.
Well, what would be the point if the guy was going to kill himself at the very end? Wouldn't the bottom line of it being 72 virgins in everlasting paradise?
I think the argument can be put that anything like this can be framed politically rather than necessarily religiously, in the sense that by trying to affect the world you live in, you're engaging in political action. So what do you think about 9/11 could have been different in order to say it was a religious attack rather than a political one.
Well, what could have been different?
What
I
could
think
have
if you
been
were to-
different in order for that to be the case? Because you said you disagreed that it was of a religious nature.
I think at best you could maybe say they may not have done like a kamikaze style attack, but I think the attack probably would have happened regardless if they were Muslim or not, by the nature of the political motivation for it. I mean, perhaps they would have found another means instead of driving the planes into the buildings themselves. But because of U.S. foreign policy, I think that was the entire reason why they were prompted to do such a thing in the first place. Granted, so the religious aspect has a role to play in how they carried it out, because if they're going to kill themselves, they'll get 72 versions, whatever. But that's not the reason they did it. They didn't do it so that they'd get the 72 virgins. And the whole operation wasn't contrived in order to get virgins. It was a political message about our foreign policy.
I think, being that
I mean, look at what they attacked. They didn't attack some random place. They didn't attack a Center for Freedom or a religious institute. They attacked our World Trade Center.
Yeah, I know. Well, they wanted to make it so that everyone would know about it. I mean, think about it. If they attacked some random building out in the middle of nowhere, no one would pay that much attention to it. But if you attacked like the nation's capital and the Twin Towers, you make a really big impact, only reinforcing the reasons why they deserve 72 virgins.
But it says something. They could have attacked the nuclear power plant, not too far off away from the Pentagon, if they really wanted to just inflict harm, make a bunch of noise.
You're missing something. They tried to attack the White House, if I remember correctly, but the plane was, over Pennsylvania. The passengers brought down the plane in Pennsylvania before it went there.
Before it went where?
To the White House.
Exactly. So
they were going to attack a place of...
They're attacking economic institutions
what is the White House?
And political institutions. They're not attacking religion.
Guys, I think we're digressing a bit onto 9/11 when we're trying to, try and keep this purely in the framework of religion itself. Do you guys have any questions for Alex?
Yeah, what does he think about the whole situation? Even though, it is about 9/11, it's still a religious thing, because that's another issue we go with. Is religion going to be unanimously evil in the world? Would us as humanity be better off without religion? I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed. When you look at the targets they hit, we can basically say, hey, maybe they didn't plan it as well. Maybe they didn't pay too much attention to the nuclear power plants and stuff. They know those plants are bunkered and stuff like that. It's almost a hit or miss whether or not they're going to cause significant damage rather than knocking off a few smokestacks. But when you attack a wide in the open building amongst many other buildings, and then you attack the nation's capital, the White House, whatever, the Pentagon, all of these are high priority buildings that will gather attention. That's what they wanted. They wanted attention. They wanted to get their message out there that, hey, we hate you guys. Now, the reason why it was initially inspired does not reflect the reason why it was carried out in the way it was. And I think that when you look at the way it was carried out in the way that was, i.e. suicide bombers flying planes in the buildings, that shows a religious motivation that caused them to do these things.
Alex, do you have an opinion on this subject or not?
I do, but I should preface it by saying that I have not researched the politics behind the 9/11 attacks, so my opinion is just that, a very poor opinion. It goes back to something Sam Harris said, and of course his opinion that it was all because of Islam, which is, where are the atheist suicide bombers doing this kind of thing? Of course, the counter to that would be, okay, well, there's atheists in the military, there's atheists dying for their country all the time. So it's an interesting debate. I'm not quite sure, but it goes back to what I said before, which is any baseless, hyped propaganda ideology can serve for the foundation of heinous acts. In fact, during the French Revolution, there was a much social fervor about the guillotine, how it was redeeming France. And what some people would do is they would want to try out the guillotine for themselves because it was such an iconic tool. So they would land the guillotine, get their heads cut off, and it wasn't religious, but it was this hyped, socially reinforced ideology that made them do it. Now, whether or not the 9/11 attacks were political or religious, I can't say, I'm not qualified to say, and I don't think we're going to settle that debate. But I think my main observation is that any sort of hyped and socially reinforced ideology can lead people to do lethal things, like the guillotine, like 9/11, wherever that came from, and like all the dictators in history, etc., etc.
And just to reiterate my point, I'm not saying religion is not a factor. I think religion is a factor insofar as it can help people to justify them within themselves or to help them rationalize it or moralize this action in their own mind. But if you look at, I believe, what the attackers have said themselves in terms of why they did it, it's not because they hate our freedom or because we're Christians or we're not Muslim or something like that. It's because of our foreign policy, namely our overwhelming support of Israel, which has been, and not only that, but our propping up of dictators in Middle Eastern countries. So again, the point I'm trying to make, just to conclude real quick, is that I feel like in terms of trying to place the religion or place the blame on solely religious factors, that they're just religious nuts, and that's why they just hate freedom or something. And in fact, it's a far more politically motivated act, essentially over land. I mean, it has religious factors, but that's by no means the primary, I would argue.
I think I'm
Sounds
in
good.
general agreement with that. Prag, you had a question.
Yeah, Alex, I was looking over your videos. I was checking out your channel, and some interesting videos. Before I watched them, I was going to ask you a few questions about, and one was your opinions towards how atheists are starting to get more into media and publicize. I know I was reading your thing. You were mentioning something about it's different from when a theist does it because theists imply that you must believe, and atheists apparently don't. I was just curious if you could elaborate on your opinions and thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that video of mine was entitled "The Problem with Public Atheism," and my point in that video was that it was just to compare atheist and religious messages, specifically on billboards, just because those are short, sweet, and simple. And when you look at a religious message, let's say a Christian message, it'll say, Jesus is the answer, and have a glowing white, non-Arab Jesus. And then it'll have a website or something. Whereas if you have an atheist billboard, it'll say something like, don't believe in God, you are not alone, or, celebrate reason for the season, something like that. And the point that I was making in that video was that an atheist billboard, all that atheists really have to say about religion is, sorry, we don't believe, we think you are wrong. It's a statement of disagreement. Even just to say, atheist, I'm not a theist, I disagree with you, I don't believe. Whereas a Christian billboard is putting something on the table saying, I believe this. And that does imply, religions are mutually exclusive, so that does imply, by the way, you Muslims, atheists out there, you're wrong, we think that you're wrong. But by putting something out there, by putting Jesus out there, you're sort of masking that passive disagreement. Whereas with atheism, well, that's all we really have to say. And, people still got offended by the billboard that said, don't believe in God, you're not alone, which of course is ridiculous, but at the same time, I think it's something that we atheists do have to watch out for, because the way that we present ourselves, the ideas that we have to present are fundamentally different than religious ideas. They are negative claims saying, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. They're not positive claims that mask the disagreement with other claims.
Alex, when you view the atheist community, do you see an opportunity for unity and support, or do you embrace individuality and difference? I mean, what do you think should be the driving force of an atheist community, if you believe such a thing should exist?
Well, I believe such a thing would exist because, first off, it's always nice to have a community. That's one of the strongholds or the strong points of religion, which is, hey, we have a community. I mean, that's why I go to church, even my same wishy-washy church I grew up in, but it's a community. It's very nice to have. It's people like people. So that's obviously a nice thing to have, is a community. And I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
Well, essentially, even within the atheist community, there's going to be huge differences, for example, in political opinions. When you take a look at the Thunderfoot and PZ Myers issue, there's all kinds of rifts and divisions going on within the community. How do you think you can go about tackling that kind of issue? I mean, do you take sides, or do you try and separate these issues from atheism as much as possible for the sake of the community?
I would say that you separate them from atheism for the sake of logic. There's nothing about atheism that says that you must also be a feminist or you must also be a conservative. None of that. I made a video on that following the whole Atheism Plus fiasco, which is basically, look, all that you need to do to be an atheist and be part of the atheist community is not be religious or believe in supernatural stuff. And the other issues really don't matter. I don't really care, if someone's a feminazi or a super extreme male rights activist. It really shouldn't enter the conversation. It can if you want to, if that's something you want to debate for the entertainment of debate, interest in that subject. But it's not like, you have to conform one way or another for the sake of the group. That's called tolerance. I don't care that someone could be a feminazi, conservative, something or other. That's not what I'm in the atheist community for.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, and it leads on nicely to a point I wanted to make, that it seems inherently dishonest to me to try and tie atheism with rationality, in the sense that a lot of people would say, for example, view feminism as part of rationality, in the sense that they want to argue for more equality. And when they try and attach that to atheism, they are being intellectually dishonest, in my opinion, because they're taking two unrelated subjects and using it for means of propaganda. Yet at the same time, to what degree can we reduce our biases when trying to convince other people of things? Because rhetoric is a natural human tool for communication, especially in regards to promoting your own ideas. So it seems...
We can try to define exactly what we believe, many millions of times. Some people equate atheism to my favorite, evolutionists, and they will even equate evolutionists when talking about astronomy. I'm sorry, evolution has nothing to do with astronomy, and evolution has nothing to do with atheism. There's some atheists out there that do not believe in the theory of evolution. They just keep the fact that they simply do not know. That's all you really need to do to be an atheist. You just have to, not know, and you have to remain indifferent on it, but you still have the ability to tell the other person why their answer does not satisfy your intellectual need for it. I mean, for example, okay, well, how can you tell me that God doesn't exist? Well, I'm not telling you that God doesn't exist. Well, why won't you accept my argument? Well, quite simply, your argument is flawed. It's a circular argument, or it's a fallacy. That's something that people don't seem to realize about atheism. Atheism isn't forcing, or you have to adopt a certain ideal into the equation. It's simply not. I think the best way to do it is, at the very beginning, don't even say you're an atheist. Just tell them what you belief and let them put the tag on you. If they want to call you an agnostic, fine, I'm an agnostic. If they want to call you an agnostic atheist, fine, I'm an agnostic atheist. They can put so many labels on you, just as long as they understand where you're coming from. If they can do that, you can have a better overall discussion, and you can have a better community, in my opinion.
Is it possible to get educated gadfly in here soon?
Yeah, we can. I'll say this, Alex. I want to personally thank you for coming on the show. I would like to have you back on and like to chat with you later on tonight. Will you be available?
Yes, I will.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sounds good, man. I will go ahead and invite Educated on and see what he has to say on this topic, or if he wants to say anything at all. Let's see what we have. Hey, Educated, what's going on? Yeah, say on this topic. Be sure to mute BlogTV.
I did.
Sounds
Awesome.
good.
Could you possibly talk about how you came to your beliefs and how you approach the topic of religion and atheism?
Mainly, I just, at a young age, just thought about what I was being told and what the book actually said. And the number one thing was we see in Genesis is, why did we leave the garden? And if you say, well, it's because of sin, and that's not really biblical, we see it in Genesis 3:26, the reason for that, which is God became jealous. And so you have this distinction between what I was being taught and what I'm reading. So that's pretty much why I just said I'm going to wait until I can understand the system before I make a judgment on it.
That works. That worked out for me, actually. I mean, if what was like the hardest part? Did you ever have like the God hammer idea like I did? Because that was it was a shocking point where I was actually thoroughly nervous about it. Were you ever nervous about calling yourself an atheist at any point, even when you were just starting?
No, not really. I never really called myself anything. Skeptic works just fine for me. But of course, labels are what other people give you.
Sounds good. I can't help noticing in your chat, you're like, I don't want this to become a shock of God, a hate room and stuff like that. Wanna go on that?
Well, the thing is, I mean, yes, you can say why the room was created, but if you're just going, in my opinion, if you're just going to rant and rant and rant on why you hate shock of God, it's just, you boil down to that level, and you're getting away from, if you want to have an actual discussion, that defeats the whole purpose of discussion. It's just the rant and rave on why you don't like this one individual.
Yeah, we're definitely not here to criticize anybody personally.